Hello, Eddie, again.
Hello, Alex. Nice to see you again. And we're now going to talk about, are we just computers or lumbering robots? And I had the great privilege in my life of working through in India mental arithmetic, then logarithms, then slide rule, then calculator, then computer. And kids nowadays just go straight into computer.
Now, do you see a difference in kind, having learned all these tools,
Mm.
techniques, technologies?
Yeah, I would say, good question. One appreciates the qualitative aspect of numbers and the relation between numbers. It's not just a digital pinpoint.
It's interesting you mentioned numbers, and this is perhaps going ahead.
Mhm.
But I was reading a book the other day, and this philosopher of science was articulating something that I wish I had been told while studying physics or while being trained as a scientist.
Mm.
And to make it short, it was the idea that obtaining numbers can be done through this interaction between our own bodies and machines we build. And that when you think about it, it's quite remarkable that we can get from nature something as a number. And that's a triumph of science. And at the same time, when taking as an idol, is what
Exactly.
confuses our whole
Yes.
thinking.
Yes, exactly. Yes. A number, well, yeah, the quantitative and the qualitative are not so separate, I think, as people like to think they are. There is a synergy between them. And the synergy for me lies in the relation between numbers. I mean, numbers on their own just don't do too much, but when you see their relation, well, the three and the seven, for example, obvious ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to discuss
Please
chapter
start with chapter
seven
six.
and
Six
chapter
first.
six. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Six is a short one,
so that our listeners can orient themselves. Yes, we're in volume two, chapter six and seven.
which is clearing the decks first.
Yes, you very often. I imagine you cooking, and you must be a very tidy man. Okay, clearing the decks again, and now we go into the concepts, and now we pause again, and we clear confusions and move on. Right?
Um, Thank you very much. That is extremely generous of you. Um, I would hope that the most important clearing is there, but it has to be physical as well. Definitely. Yeah. I think the first point I make the distinction between the individuality and the personality.
Yes.
Again, yeah, the
Yes.
fact that in individuality is that which cannot be divided, but the personality is the lower quaternary, the lower triad, and the physical body that which sounds through. But the point here is to emphasize that the two are not separate. One is the projection of the other, like the mask is the actor's face. But in where we talked about resurrection a little earlier, but the resurrection happens when the individuality takes on new bodies to express itself. I mean, it's the trouble. Sorry, I'm digressing a bit. The trouble with words like resurrection, that people take it in the literal sense as it applies only to Christianity. It's a universal principle.
Mm.
It's not just Christ the man, it's Christos in us. And that's the point. It's the Christos principle in us, the individuality which resurrects.
Yes.
So, sorry. Yeah,
No,
so,
I love these
yeah,
digressions. I mean,
yeah.
there's a sweet spot between literality and taking it metaphorically, and I'm always looking for this third space, right? Because on the one hand, of course, we don't mean it absolutely literally, but if we only mean it metaphorically, then what do we
Yeah.
mean anyways? I mean, I
No,
guess there's something quite serious that's both literal and also
yes.
metaphorical.
One has to ground it. Well said, yeah. And just finally, on the personality, all the karmic attributes of the physical life, its characteristics are all in the range of the personality that one has to sort out.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so you're reinstating again, emphasizing the distinction between individuality and personality, and we can have
separate things.
Yes, and we can have then different personalities, I suppose, different masks, as you say, from its etymology, right? We can wear different masks that sound differently on top of our individuality.
And we can be split personalities, unfortunately, as well. And the Jekyll and Hyde phenomena is a very good example.
Yeah, would you say then that psychology deals with personality, but it doesn't deal with individuality? Here we could speak about some sort of a transcendence of psychology, another discipline that would, to the degree that it makes sense, to deal with our individuality.
Extremely well put, Alex. Extremely well put. Most psychology, yes, but I would say the transpersonal psychology, Assagioli, and the wonderful course in transpersonal psychology that the Scientific and Medical are hosting through Les Lancaster and the Aleph Trust, that, in my view, does deal with the higher principles. But mainstream psychology, no, it doesn't. And there's a wonderful article, I forget who by, but in the penultimate Paradigm Explorer of the Scientific Medical Network, with a very, very apt heading, How Psychology Has Lost Its Mind.
Yes. Well, psychology has, from the very beginning, unfortunately, set the mind aside. It has been, they have been ashamed of studying mind because, and this is another digression, I think, because they wanted to imitate the big brother of physics, and they misunderstood that physics is only about measuring and mathematizing. And so that's why the behaviorist said, forget it. Psychologos is not going to be about the psyche. It's going to be about what we can put a number on. And this is going to be behavior. So it has taken us more than 100 years to go from comportment to cognition to consciousness because of that stupid initial knee-jerk response of saying, no, I want to be as respectable as a physicist or a biologist.
Yes, it's to be respectable, to be seen to be a science, without realizing that physics is honeycombed in metaphysics, as Blavatsky put it. Physics is surrounded by mystery. But mystery is the fatality of science. It cannot tolerate mystery.
I like that.
That space in between, John Keats talked of negative capability, the ability to sit quietly and just trust the process.
Yes. Yeah, the difference between mystery and enigma, right? An enigma is a puzzle, is a big Sudoku to be cracked.
Yeah.
But a mystery isn't. So how do you do science on something that's really a mystery, right? Well, another misconception that you stress, and it's worth stressing, is soul and spirit. And you make clear that some theosophists, if I recall, may have confused that as well. It's easy to conflate.
Early on, it's easy to conflate the two. But it's a conflation that occurred definitely during the spiritualist phenomena of the 19th century.
I see. Yes.
Yeah, where soul is that interface. It's the middle management between the chief executive and the shop floor.
Yes.
And one can touch both ends.
Then you write about all these millions of thoughts, and you suggest, well, may we be able to put them in two boxes, those that are impersonal and those that are personal. I never thought I never thought of doing that with my thoughts.
Well, nothing wrong with personal thoughts. We need them, but personal for what reason? Is it personal for survival, to so that I can be of service to others? Is it personal for self-aggrandizement? So, in that sense, of the millions of thoughts, one can certainly put them in those two silos.
Yeah. Well, and there's a slightly spooky aspect of this, and I think I'm mentally well, but I would confess to you and to whoever is watching that I sometimes have the impression that I'm not thinking the thoughts, that that they're just, I'm being thought by them, or that I'm not their owner, that they just possess me briefly and I can listen to them.
Yes, Àlex, absolutely. You call them into being. Thoughts are like living entities. You call them into being. So the brain does not create thought. Thought is a projection from thought with a capital T, which is an activity of consciousness. Yes. The fact that you personally realize this is so significant that sometimes you feel thoughts are thinking you.
Yes. Good thoughts, and also
not so
rather, yes. What is this? Why am I thinking this?
Yes.
Go get out. Briefly. I mean, I'm not in this state for seconds, but it's so brief. Like, why am I thinking this? Where is this coming from? Yes.
As that wonderful friend of mine, Firoz Mehta, a wonderful sage, in my opinion, talking of God and devil, he said, if you want proof, look at yourself in the mirror. You see both. That which creates your unpleasant thoughts and that which creates your lovely thoughts.
Yeah, Eddie, what are thoughts? Anyways, I wasn't planning on asking you this. What are thoughts from a perennial philosophy point of view?
Oh, my goodness. A waveform that has intelligence and energy. It's an intelligent energy entity. And that is...
fascinating. That is fascinating. Yeah. All right.
And the fact that telepathy exists shows the power of thought.
Yes.
Non-local.
Totally. You also write about animals in this chapter, in chapter 6 again. I'm so fascinated because, I've studied animals for many years, more than a decade. That was my entry point into biology and neuroscience. And later on, I've been more interested in humans, of course. But it's so fascinating to draw similarities and differences between us humans, who are also animals, and animals themselves. And then there's this quote by Blavatsky that's so significant, and I would like you to unpack it, that say that animals are ensouled by the principle's potentiality.
Potentially, yeah.
But men actually.
Actually, yeah. Now, yes, to understand this, again, let's think of an analogy. Even Einstein was potentially a mathematician at the age of 3 months, let's say. But that potentiality flowered into actuality soon in the course of the genius that he was. So potentially means there is the possibility of being actual in time and space as evolution progresses. But man is can be animal-like, but animal-like doesn't mean he is an animal, and there lies the confusion. Because we can say, I'm not going to behave like an animal. I'm going to be sensible. I'm going to help others. I'm going to be philanthropic. I'm not just going to think of myself. An animal is not being selfish. It's being itself.
Animals can also cooperate. They can help each other.
They can most certainly cooperate. And I find it irritating when people just like to quote Darwin's survival of the fittest, and they go on about that, but they don't realize that in his book, the pedigree of man, I think, no, that was Eckhart. The descent of man, origin of the species, descent of man. There's been, thank you computers, a word search, and the word cooperation occurs far more than competition. And Darwin wrote that the survival of the fittest is the survival of those who can cooperate. Why do this is our the prejudice, why do we associate fittest with, strongest and I can bash your face in? Why is that fittest? The fittest can be the most morally upright, the most generous, the most resilient. That's part of being fit. And cooperation enhances that quality, not a fight in the jungle.
Yes. It certainly fits certain narratives, and that's what it's been taking up in this sense, totally.
But again, it's been taken down to the lowest physical level. Fittest means brute force.
Mm-hmm.
And but survival of, who is doing the surviving? And for what purpose? What's the end goal? What's the end game of the survivor?
Yes. Now back to animals. Because we know before Darwin, we used to think that we are so special that we are the only creatures with mind, let's say. After Darwin, perhaps the pendulums went all the way to the other side, and we realized, well, we are one more amongst other creatures in a particular sense. But what you're writing here indicates that when mankind emerged, something quite spectacular in the history of the cosmos happened. Like some beings became ensouled, actually ensouled, right? What is that? What is that remarkable happening?
Oh my goodness, that is a huge part of occult science, which is known as rounds and races. And I've touched on it in volume 3. It refers to the ensoulment, as you put it, of the early races of humanity by advanced beings. And those early races of humanity were the next step in evolution of the animal kingdom.
Yeah. Ensoulment of humanity by other races who were ensouled or weren't?
No, of advanced beings from other schemes of evolution.
Who were ensouled.
Known as the Manasaputras, the sons of mind, the Kumaras and the Agnishvatas. And what they did was, by ensouled, what we mean is they didn't bequeath mind, M-I-N-D, they activated the mind principle. So the mind principle was dormant, but their activity sparked it into life, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm smiling because this is fascinating because now we're going to discuss chapter 7 and brain as computer, right? So we go from these ideas to the dullest of possible conception, right? I felt like, okay, we're gonna now drop a few thousand feet,
Yes.
as we transition to what's mostly belief about what minds are, which are nothing but what brains do, and what do brains do, where they're basically wet computers, right? So let's do this free fall now into chapter 7.
Yeah, by all means, yes.
All right. So computationalism, also functionalism, also cognitivism. These are some problematic isms, aren't they?
Lots of isms, yes.
Yes.
The more isms, the more the confusion.
Yes. What's that master analogy then? Let's talk about the master analogy.
Yes, let's... the master analogy is minds are to brains as software is to computer hardware. But the thing is, Àlex, on the surface, it seems to make sense. It seems to make sense because what they're saying is, with a computer, you can dismantle it, you can open it up with your scalpel, look at it, components on the microscope. You can't do that to software. Of course, you can't dissect the mathematical code and find out the programmer. And the structure of software and hardware are completely different, even though software is wholly embodied by hardware. And software on its own is meaningless. It's an abstraction. It needs hardware. So analogously, then, the brain has its own structure, which we can easily discover using MRI and all the rest of it. Mind also has structure in the sense of reason, memory, and imagination. we can't dissect the contents of the mind with MRI and scalpels, and yet mind cannot exist, they say, without its associated hardware, namely the brain. Therefore, minds are to brains as software is to a computer. One can't exist without the other. And that's a good example of category errors, in my opinion. And Mr. Ray Kurzweil of Google, or formerly of Google, is confidently telling us by 2045, machine intelligence will dominate human intelligence.
Yes, all these promises.
At the moment, computers are much smarter than us. A long time ago, computers can add up much faster than we can. Big deal.
Well, having been in neuroscience for many years, I can with compassion say that the distinction between software and hardware is a useful heuristics, if you wish. It makes sense. You can separate that, and you can say things at different levels. I think the problem is when this heuristic, which is some sort of soft epistemology, becomes an ontology that simply says what things are. And at the same time, I realize how this can be brought to a bigger extent by now then saying that it's not just that that brains compute, but that the whole universe is a big machine, and that the laws of physics are just computations. So it's like going back to Galileo, but now rather than mathematics, everything is a big computer. And at the same time, I find it sweet that some of these ideas are like these deep principles of perennial philosophy, just diluted so that they are palatable. Because you see, a software, it's something that sounds kind of immortal, or something that can survive without the hardware. Actually, the promises of transhumanists are that we may be able to keep that essence, So it seems they're talking about souls and spirits. They're just doing it in a very dull way. Perhaps because they don't want to go beyond that. They don't want to, they cannot. I'm not sure. Just saying that I think they're totally wrong, but perhaps for the right reasons.
Yes, you said a very significant thing. They're confusing epistemology with ontology. That's the confusion. They're confusing the thing in itself, nature in herself, with the knowledge about and the methodology to discover it. And they're terribly scared of subjectivity, because the whole idea seems to eliminate subjectivity to the merely physically observable. And this is still a shadow from the Vienna school of logical positivism. Only apis posteriori arguments, empirical evidence has any value. A priori is opinion, subjective.
Yes.
So once you eliminate subjectivity and feeling by ignoring everything that is subjective, then the case for the computer mind is strengthened. Because you then reduce the mind to a computer. And you can argue about that in three stages, really. Or, well, usually three, our favorite number.
Well, you detail the argumentation and also the flaws and caveats and things that computationalism cannot explain. Maybe we can detail some of them. Yeah, but I agree with you that there's subjectivity is the great elephant in the room.
The gray elephant, yes. It is only the gray elephant because it cannot be measured, touched, poked, seen, smelt. It's not a see-touch reality. It's an experience.
Yes.
But what's wrong with why doesn't experience have validity?
And the paradox is that the very fact that you can count, for instance, being obsessed with numbers, you can count by virtue of being aware of counting. You could also say you can count unconsciously, but any idea you form about brains or counting or even hardware or software is ultimately an experience in consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is.
Well, it's the blind spot again. It makes sense. It makes sense in its proper place.
It's the blind spot if you start from matter and try and go upwards.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you want to discuss some of these major figures? I mean, I'm a bit, to be honest, a bit sick of hearing about them, like Dennett and Kurzweil and so on, because I think they've taken. I mean, we need to sometimes not rebut them, but critique them if necessary. But I think they have taken a disproportional amount of attention, and perhaps the best thing is not to talk about them at all.
They've gained undue celebrity status, but they've gained it. But let's ask why, because they've resonated with the current mindset of the scientific community. That's why they've achieved celebrity status. So people make them celebrities because they're saying what they want to hear.
Yes. And then they want to hear more. It's a positive feedback loop.
So, roboticism, functionalism, all of these are the tricks that they get up to try and convince us that we are essentially computers. Well, you do it by blurring the distinction between a robot and man, and reducing subjectivity to the physical, and arguing that changes in our emotions are changes solely in our brain states. And it sounds quite plausible to say that, if your car wheel and steering wheel is faulty, you won't maneuver your car. Similarly, if you have a blow to your head, you'll behave differently. Now, how silly to say that the car has a soul, S-O-U-L, that feels that it's turning corners awkwardly. How silly to think there is a soul to feel that I am behaving differently. My computer sees red. Does it experience red? But what they miss is that even though a blow to the head would render us unconscious, or brain surgery would change the way we behave, these things limit consciousness, but it makes it appear that the brain generates it. But they don't. They limit consciousness in the way that the great William James showed with the permissive theory. It's like a reducing valve, opening and closing. So it limits the flow of consciousness, a blow on the head. It doesn't mean that the brain generates consciousness if you get a blow on your head and you can't think.
Yes. We may have mentioned this in volume 1, but there's something funny about the use of metaphors, because there's some philosophers of life. I don't recall if it was George Canguilhem or Hans Jonas, but in one of their essays, he's describing how first cars and trains were thought in the image of horses. So the mechanical was thought in terms of the living and organic, but then like the sleight of hand just change it, and then from now on animals are seen as machines. And this is an ugly trick, because originally we would think of them in terms of animals. And also similarly, if we would map most of the metaphors used, and we know we can classify them according to James into productive and permissive, but even if we do that, most of them are technological or have to do with technique, but and techne, right, in the Greek sense, and very few are organic. And I must celebrate my fellow Spaniard Santiago Ramón y Cajal, who used to think of the brain as a garden, as a jungle.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So that just changed it's like, in music, this just changed the tone of the song. Beautiful. The moment you think in terms of that, and why not? Why insisting so much in microchips and electric flows? Think if it is a jungle, and Cajal would speak about the young jungle and how it would grow and what could happen, and how the trees and the leaves are also trying to meet each other.
Of something that's organic. Yes. Garden means flowers, soil, nature, gardener. It's a living being.
Yes.
And your friend. I missed his name. Sorry.
Oh, Santiago Ramón y Cajal, the only kind of proper Nobel laureate we have in Spain, the discovery of the structure of brain.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of great polymaths like Leonardo, who thought as in the systems approach. Goethe, nature was a living being. You're seeing the same sensitivity.
Yes. And then there's this other intuition that I took from a philosopher friend of mine, who took it from somewhere else, of course, that says, well, depending on how you ask nature, how you project your ideas to nature, well, you'll see them back. So if you project onto them computer-like stuff, well, the echo is going to be computer-like. But if you project garden-like stuff, you'll see garden-like stuff. So just pick the one and realize that they all do something, but none of them is an absolute truth.
Yeah. The great Heisenberg said, nature responds to our method of questioning.
Yes. Yeah, probably it comes from him, that idea.
Yeah, well, whoever. But ask the right question, yes, and nature will respond in kind. Yes. Ask a stupid question and nature will laugh at you. That she does.
Yes. You also detail some flaws of the argument.
Oh, yes.
Not just philosophical, but also even empirical.
Yeah, sure. The most important is that, and this is something that, and I haven't researched it as thoroughly as I'd like to, George Lakoff, who pointed out that our thinking is metaphorical, but our circuitry is metaphorical circuitry, but the computer circuitry is not metaphorical, it's electrical circuitry. So we don't think in that sort of logical, digital way that we'd like to think we do because we are computers. But then one can talk of all sorts of other things, like the human mind tends to mature and increase in power. Software doesn't do that unless there's a programmer involved. We can say human minds want to know all about such things as consciousness and love and life and joy and sorrow. The software doesn't flash up on your screen, tell me what sorrow means, unless you program it into it. But most significantly, as death approaches, we have terminal lucidity as a well-known phenomena. Computer hardware doesn't suddenly increase in power and clarity as the components wear. So there's so many flaws in their thinking. And also, minds can't be totally erased. Software can be erased.
And the many psychical phenomena we've touched in Volume 1 are challenges, real challenges.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
To this notion.
Psychical phenomena are a great challenge to this, yeah.
But you see how potent is this software, hardware, and computer metaphor, that even thinkers who oppose materialism, and we don't need to name them, that wish to propose idealism, which is fine with me, or dual aspect monism, but mostly idealism, end up using as well a computer metaphor, but talking about a computer screen and the pixels in the screen and the underlying processes under the screen and virtual reality and interfaces and so on. So it just permeates across the spectrum of views.
It does. That metaphor is deeply entrenched in our psyche at the moment, yes. And it's not likely to go away, I think.
Do you think, this occurred to me now, because when I asked you at the beginning of this conversation, and I didn't know I would ask you that what are thoughts? And you said something like that they are these intelligent energy entities. Well, it seems sometimes that some of these thoughts grow in strength and then possess the mindgeist of an entire civilization.
Yes, they become almost living entities in their own.
Yes, like a collective. Well, virus, maybe it's a too pejorative term, but a collective entity.
Mass.
Yes,
like
and then
they
just stay there. It's like locusts, They stay there, and they're really hard to whiff off, to brush off.
Absolutely, and that explains possessions and all things like that. But this has such subtle ramifications, because a lot of the thoughts that possess us, we are being, how can I put it, vampirized by these vampire-like non-physical entities that we spoke of in our previous conversation, that have acquired a sort of resonant empathy with us and are sucking our vitality.
Yes. This is pretty real. This is pretty tangible.
Yes.
Again, not just a metaphor, not literally either, but not just a metaphor.
No, and it has been photographed, not quite the thoughts, but the energetic emanations from corpses. I mentioned that the photographic images produced by Harry Oldfield from 2 people who committed suicide and 2 people who died naturally, showing that the natural deaths, there was an energy emanation even from the corpse that was a few feet above the body and taking the shape of the corpse. But in the case of the suicide, there was a very low-grade energy. Again, making the point that it's not a good idea to take your life.
What does that energy, when you say energy or photograph, what's being captured there?
What he invented a thing called a polytropic interferometer photography, using interference technology, measuring and showing on a computer screen using software, of course, showing what you might call the lowest level of the aura, the energy field. And there is no doubt about the accuracy and the truthfulness of it, because I've attended many of his demonstrations where he could literally scan the audience and pick out problems in the audience, like a lesion here or a heart problem or other problems, just by looking at the energy field. So these things can be subjected to scientific scrutiny.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
So maybe this is rushing too much, but what's the fate of humanity, given where we are and given these notions of, of energy being trapped in a particular local minimum, and what philosophy is known forever? Because you also mentioned this at the end of this chapter when you discuss, AI and robots and the fate that's in front of us.
Yeah, I think the real struggle is not between robots and robots or anything like that. It's the fear is not that machines and robots will become more human-like, but humans will become more robot-like. That is the danger to be aware of. Now,
there must be a spark that cannot be extinguished, or can it? Or can it?
No. Ultimately, absolutely not. It can be smothered and smothered evermore, but not extinguished.
Since you often
in our age now, we are questioning this. The very fact that we are questioning this totally materialistic computational metaphor indicates the spark.
Yeah. Yes. So how to reconcile machines getting better with humans getting better? Meaning must we oppose technological development, or can we work with it?
Oh, work with it. Definitely, Àlex, yes. Technological development, and there I include greater and greater understanding of the brain and the body, is to be welcomed with open arms, because there is that beautiful, beautiful quotation by Blavatsky that shows the importance of refining and perfecting the physical body, in that if you liken the higher self, the immortal triad, to Paganini, and the physical vesture to a violin, if Paganini is given a cheap and cracked fiddle, there's only so much he can do. But give him a Stradivarius and the quality of the music will be that much finer. So it's all to our advantage. We applaud science for telling us more about our bodies and our brains, because as long as we make them the Stradivarius of the Paganini within us. But Peter Leggett put it more, the Vice Chancellor of Surrey University and a pioneer of the Scientific Medical Network, by analogy with the pianist and the piano. If either are faulty, so will be the music.
Yes. What I'm trying to see is if there is a way of convergence with transhumanism and transcendence or transpersonal, or maybe an alternative is that there are different routes of evolution, and good luck. Pick the one you can and see you later.
I like it. See, I like the way you say "see you late." See you later means we'll meet again, doesn't it?
Well, it can also mean good luck.
Yeah, it also means good luck.
I mean, I don't know. We don't know. I don't see how they can merge, but I kind of see how one can go one way, like species. Species speciate. One can go one way, the other can go the other way, and in many thousand or million years, we are different. We are different creatures.
Yes, one is the path of spirit, the other is the path of matter, so to speak. And with the transhumanist movement, the philosophical anomalies are just absolutely enormous. Transhumanism implies cryonics, freezing the body in liquid nitrogen, and quite a few transhumanists have opted only to freeze their heads. Others have opted to freeze their nervous system.
Yes.
Including Robert Ettinger, the pioneer of this cryonics, in the hope that science will progress one day such that the head and body can be reunited and the consciousness will jump out again. But I can just about hear Sir Karl Popper saying this is promissory materialism.
Yes.
When one deals with matter, which is all the transhumanism is about, enhancing the properties of matter, one is inherently dealing with something that will decay eventually.
Yes, and well, let me ask it. Let me put it in a question form. Is transhumanism then an enemy of perennial philosophy?
Yes, only to the extent that it shows the beauty of the perennial philosophy in its glory and its practicality.
How so?
Because the perennial philosophy talks about that we have a choice of two paths, the path of spirit and the path of matter, and one will lead to a dead end, because the path of matter is the increasing concretion and constipation of spirit. Spirit needs a vehicle, but when the vehicle tightens and strangles the spirit, there's no life there.
And again, I see the sweet irony when I compare it, and I'm sorry I always mention him, but with Sri Aurobindo's mission to divinize matter rather than materialize spirit, that actually he would get to where transhumanists want to get, but probably by the correct, if I can put it this way, the correct route.
way. Yes, absolutely.
So there is this drive inside. It's just misapplied or misinstantiated.
Yes, well said, misapplied.
Yeah.
And one asks, why do transhumanists want to live forever? What is it in them that wants to live forever? They don't ask that question. If we're just matter and computer stuff, well, do computers ask, can I live forever? There's a strong ego drive there, masquerading in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. Now, in this chapter, you also use a word that I found very appropriate, and I've only heard it when speaking about the King of Spain with respect to with respect to how he's held in court, which is the inviolability. How do you pronounce it? Inviolability of, in this case, you're talking about materialism. It's so interesting that some of these ideas, right, they're untouchable. They're untouchable so far. Like the King of Spain doing something inappropriate, and as a king, he cannot be subjected. Inviolable. Yes. So interesting. What's inviolable? Sorry, I cannot pronounce this word.
Inviolable.
about those notions.
Well, you can't violate that which is eternal and that which is essentially of spirit. You can only violate that which is downstairs, so to speak.
Yes.
Or you can only violate that which calls it into being. If I have such management over my thoughts, you can't violate my thoughts with ugly thoughts. But if I can't manage my mind, it can be violated by being in contact with other minds.
So there's an intrinsic protection built in.
Yes, I would say so.
That's good news.
It's very good news. There is an intrinsic protection. Would we just recognize it and honor it for what it is? Yes.
Now, Eddie, why did you... This is a high-level question about this chapter. Why did you write this chapter here again? I know you recur to just hammer and set things, but we talked about brains, computers, materialism, and then in volume 2 you spoke about the constitution of man and also about death, and now you clear the decks and then you come back to the brain as a wet computer. Why are you coming back to the brain here?
I'm coming back because on the subject of consciousness, having just written Death is Transition, trying to show the progression of consciousness, this chapter is showing that the idea that we are just computers and numbering robots is a fallacious argument that cuts right across every philosophy, perennial or otherwise.
Yes. So this kind of free fall sensation I had, when I finished reading chapter 5, right, and then what goes into 6, and then quickly into 7 is like, well, we're back to that really shallow idea again. But yes, it's the one dominating. Astounding.
But also to show, as I've always tried, how the greatest minds in science have seen the fallacious arguments that the computationalists put forward, like the great Sir Francis Walsh, who you said science wasn't made for man, man made science. So computers weren't for man, man made computers. But he makes the point, and the fundamental point, that the instrument is always on a lower level than the performer, even though the performer be dependent on the instrument.
Yes. Unless the instrument uses as its instrument, which is what seems to be happening despite this protection we just discussed.
Yeah.
You know, this idea that we are the, what is it, what was it, the reproducing organs of computers? Somebody wrote that we humans are going to be the batteries, and also yes, it's a horrible thought, but the insight was, well, they'll ultimately use us to just reproduce themselves because they cannot, and so we'll be making those, and so the hierarchy will be reversed, and we will be the instrument, and they will be
the masters, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yes. I think Ian McGilchrist might have something to say about that, of how the emissary doesn't realize he's betraying his master. In thinking that he is the master, he's betraying his master. And they're not realizing, coming back to the violin and Paganini, that, if the brain produces thought without the mind, then the violin, the strings and the wood of the violin produce sound without the violinist on their own.
Yes. So where are we now? Where are we now in this journey? We are reaching the end of volume 2.
We are, and the next chapter is trying to show the unity of the perennial philosophy through all the great religious and cultural traditions. And the final chapter is using an analogy of building a temple and constructing a power station to try and understand how we function and how we are constituted.
Wonderful. And the 2 appendices that are so rich too.
The 3 appendices, yes.
3, sorry. 3, okay, I especially came to mind the one about the ether. Yes. Sorry, and 3. What are the 3 again?
Well, the central one, the ether, is important because the word ether figures a lot in occult doctrine, but we're not talking of the ether of the Victorians. That was the subject of the Michelson-Morley experiment, where they're trying to discover whether the ether exists or not. That ether, if you like, is the lowest level, the lining, the coarsest grade of aether, A-E-T-H-E-R, akasha, if you like. But the point of this appendix is to show that the Michelson-Morley experiment, which is now gospel in physics, is certainly not all it's cracked up to be. The work of Dayton Miller was far more thorough in showing the existence of the ether. And to cap it all, Einstein's lecture to the University of Leiden says, he said that the notion of relativity without an ether would just be a nonsense. But what kind of ether are we talking about? So it's to show with lots and lots of references that the Michelson-Morley experiment, which is, reverential in the physics laboratory, is not all it's cracked up to be. The first appendix is more detail on the Antakarana, that vital umbilical connection between the child and the parent, the personality and the higher self, which in great souls like the Christ, when you are completely merged in your higher self, you don't need a bridge. If you cross from A to B, you don't need a bridge. The third appendix is dealing with this whole question of dogmatism in all societies, in this case, the pockets of the Theosophical Society, where certain teaching is taken as gospel, which is such a problem in science, of course, and in spiritual society. Despite all talk of a universal approach, teachings get dogmatized.
Yes, they stagnate, they get frozen.
Exactly. They get frozen. Yes, you need to keep the window open all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get there. If we can also discuss those appendices soon.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Àlex.
Well, it's been lovely again. Thank you very much, Eddie, for
Thank you very much.
writing.
It's been very exciting and very energizing.
Same here.
Thank you so much, Àlex, for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.